Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. This is a very exciting time for St. John's. I'm Lance Lockwood. I'm a member of the GSA and a member of St. John's, which I proudly say. St. John's United is a wonderful place. We hope that you can come and visit us someday. Before we start this evening, I just have some housekeeping and some proper things. I'd like to acknowledge the land. Today, we are thankful to be live streaming from MacKay, the territory governed by the peace and friendship treaties. Our board has committed working towards reconciliation with the First Peoples of Canada by providing resources, educational programs. This is an ongoing commitment, a journey that has just begun. Together, we strive to live respectfully and with those around us, embracing differences to make a difference. Let us remember that we are all treaty people. I'd like to take a little bit about, tell you a little bit about what Pi is. Pi is a United Church happening that about 4 years ago, started by some people, one of whom will be our guest speaker on Monday night, the Right Reverend Gary Patterson, former moderator of the United Church, and that he will be doing his presentation live, although virtually from Vancouver, and there will be a Q&A after. So that is truly something to look forward to. Pi is an organization or a way of correcting, what is it? Public, intentional, and explicit. So that's the meaning of Pi. Tonight we have the honor of having Dan MacKay uh, here with us tonight. And Dan, it comes with is known really well in the US LGBTQIA plus community. He has been around, and I'm just going to wing it here. I think well over 30 years being involved in the our community, and we're so pleased to have him this evening. And he is also the editor and manager of Waves magazine. It used to be a newspaper live or a newspaper print, and now it's online. And many of you are probably hooking up with us tonight from reading that. So we welcome Dan. We had to make a few little changes here tonight, so we apologize for our startup. And Dan, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you being our first guest of Pi Day celebrations for 2022. We're really delighted to have you. And please tell us some more about yourself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lance. Thank you very much for having me. Happy Pi Day. I'm looking forward to some pie right after the presentation. So tonight, Lance, what I'm hoping to do is to give you a little bit about a little bit of a perspective of the history of the Q community in Halifax. And just for fun, I thought I would tell that via the story of the spiritual communities in the city. And the history of both of those is super rich. That's one goal. The other goal is to show that Halifax, give people some idea of what a vibrant place Halifax has been for exactly half a century. I'll be telling you about that. And the third thing, Lance and audience, is that I want to be convincing both of you that this is a really great time to be getting involved with telling our history and contributing to our archives and doing research and volunteering in that way. So that's, you'll see little plugs for that kind of service work popping in and out during the evening. I think we're going to get through this in about an hour. Uh, Both Lance and audience, we intended to answer questions as we're going through this. And so if you paste your questions online, Annika, I think, will be reading them to me. And so I think we should get them. So feel free to post questions. Annika will put up her hand at appropriate moments, and I'm pretty sure that's all going to work well. So we did our land acknowledgement. The other purpose of this map was to show where I'm from. I'm from right down here, this tippy southern tip of Nova Scotia. I was literally born right here. Halifax, of course, is right up about here. And we'll see a little bit more about this area later. There's a historical, there are two historical events, one of which I have a slide for and one of which I don't. So briefly, I'm just going to burn through a little bit about me. My dad, here, right down here, my dad was kind of did plumbing and heating and kind of was a handyman. And believe it or not, in this tippy little southern, outside of this tippy little southern village in Nova Scotia, there was an enclave of lesbian book publisher, Summer People, and they came to they had a cottage. It wasn't a cottage; it was a house. They lived in New York, and they were extremely literate. There were no walls. You could not see any walls in Aunt Mamie and Aunt Tessa's house. They were all every square inch was covered with books. And they got me involved with books. This is me at their house with their cat. This is the same cat here. And and it wasn't until I was a teenager that I realized that my parents were okay with Aunt Mamie and Aunt Tessa, who were obviously a couple, and I learned later had been a couple. They had rented the same, well, I went and visited them. They had rented the same apartment in Greenwich Village at 14 Christopher Street since 1938. They had lived in the same apartment together. But of course, I was a kid. The idea of them being lesbians, the L word, never occurred to me. My parents referred to them as old maids, which was the word at the time. That's what everybody called lesbians back then. And there was also Aunt Maria and Aunt Marion. They were also involved with book stuff. Aunt Marion was a you wouldn't call her that these days, but at the time she was called an anthropologist, and she was studying Mi'kmaq culture, and she was publishing books about Mi'kmaq traditions. And so early on, that's one of the first things that I learned to read was books of Mi'kmaq legends. And they're still using up neurons in my head, and I still love it.
Dan, are some of her books still around?
You can find them in used bookstores. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
and you can find. Wait. I just got to get a slight diversion here. Aunt Maria published a book called the Encyclopedia of North American Folklore. One day, a bunch of musicians, so this book that she wrote the whole book, she collected all of these legends and she published it, this encyclopedia book of American folklore. This is my Aunt Maria from here. One day there was a band standing around, and they were probably all stoned to the gills and possibly drunk to the gills, and they were looking for a cool name for their band. And they opened my Aunt Maria's book and they flipped through it and they found a name that they liked, and the name was the Grateful Dead. It's a story. It's an American story legend. Oh my God, I'm getting off track here. American story legend about someone who dies and their ghost is hanging around, and there's no money to bury them. And so the ghost hangs around this village, and this visitor comes and says, "This is terrible. I'm going to pay to have the body buried." And the ghost is so grateful that the ghost hangs around with the traveler throughout the story cycle and helps him out. And so the story cycle is called The Grateful Dead. The band is called The Grateful Dead. My aunt, Mamie, my aunt Maria Leach named Grateful Dead. How cool is that?
Great story.
Well,
Get back on the railroad.
get back on track here, dear. Right. Uh-oh, having trouble with my road here. Okay. This is me in high school. This is high school newspaper publishing. I got hooked on doing publishing. This is me up here. This is me in the corner. This is this is the head of the newspaper club at the school, who later became my Latin teacher in senior high school. And many of these people, believe it or not, are still friends. It's all 40 years ago. And at this point, I do presentations to high schools fairly often, very often to junior high schools. And it's at this point that I tell people that if you're in junior high, this is almost certainly the most miserable time of your life, especially if you're a little different, especially if you're not the most amazing person in the class. And it's okay for this to be the most miserable time of your life. It gets better from here. And so this is my usual message here. Junior high was a perfectly wretched time for me. Anyway, then so here's some work stuff. I worked for this beautiful blonde man who never wore a shirt and wore a cut-off Daisy Dukes at work. And as a 15-year-old, it was mighty distracting, let me tell you. And then I got a job in a print shop running a little press, almost exactly like that. And again, I got ink under my fingernails. And once you have that, you never get the ink from under your fingernails. You've got to be publishing from now on. I worked in a museum for a while. I was freelancing for a while. I did a whole bunch of things, including computer automated publishing of books. So someone would have a database, and they would say, "Dan, can you make the database into a book every day or every month, say?" This is a catalog for a video store in Halifax called Critics' Choice. That was in the Carpenter's Hall, where Propeller is now. And they had a cool database. I built the database, and they said, "Can you make a catalog for you?" And I was like, "Oh, well, excuse me." And so we printed the catalog every couple of months, fresh catalog of videos. And then I got hired to build the internet in Canada. And Lance and audience and Annika and people on Zoom, if you like the internet, if that internet's working out for you, well, you're very welcome.
Yes, thank you.
And I don't have any ego problems at all. Okay, moving along. If I want to, this is kind of my perspective on faith communities, Lance, and I hope it's not offensive. In the drawing here, we see a teacher presenting, maybe the pastor, presenting the faith tradition that people are in to a bunch of people, probably in something like confirmation class. Is that a United Church term? Do you guys do confirmation? Okay, United Church confirmation class. Sorry, I do so many different faith experiences that it's hard to keep the anyway. And the caption reads, "So this is where our movement came along and finally got the Bible right." And you know, as far as I'm concerned, all of these people got the Bible right. I am just as happy to be belting out hymns with the Christians, or trying to sing Hebrew, or chanting with the Wiccans, or sitting with the Buddhists or the Quakers. I'm happy with all of these. One of my favorite people in the world is one of his sayings is, "There are many paths to the divine," and so that's where I sit with that. And so you'll be seeing a very multi spiritual experience tonight. One cool thing, last week, Lance, I was at a queer church called Queer Spirit Church. It's the newest gay church, LGBT church in Halifax. It's being held at First Baptist. It's being hosted by First Baptist Church, and they had a lesbian rabbi on the pulpit delivering the sermon. And I'm very grateful to be living in a city where there can be a lesbian rabbi and the her wife greeting people at the door in a Baptist church in a Baptist building of a queer church. That's pretty neat. We live in a pretty amazing city here in Halifax. I'm very happy about that. And then again, back to me and we're almost done with me here. Me with publishing. This is Publishing Waves, and we did this is back in the 1980s. We did it with a Mac, an old Mac computer and an inkjet printer, and people standing around a table, and we put the whole magazine together in an afternoon, having fun. And it was a chance once a month. This is in the AIDS Coalition office at the time. Once a month we got together, we did this, and we produced the whole magazine in an afternoon. And it went to the printer, and it went to distribution.
How many years was the paper edition?
Well, that's a kind of difficult question because there was a long period of evolution. Very shortly after we had a gay organization in Halifax in 1972, 50 years ago, there was a newsletter of it, of course, because every organization has a newsletter. That newsletter on and off was called the Gazette, and it was published very sporadically. And then in the early 80s, I got involved because I had ink under my fingers and I had to do something. And we were putting out a kind of goofy looking magazine once a month, also called the Gazette. And then a professional journalist got involved, a guy named Kevin Crombie, and he said, let's crank this up a notch. And he made it into a completely professional magazine at that point. And we renamed it because the organization was still called GAE, and we wanted to make the magazine independent of GAE. It was called the Gazette, G-A-E-Z. We renamed it Waves. So you could say 50 years, you could say 35 years with that name, more or less. This is, and I got involved with history as well because people just started giving me stuff. So they gave me stories and documents and facts, and I needed someplace to put them because I'm kind of squirrely that way. And so I created this encyclopedia in about 2000, and it has room for everything. At this point, here's the A section. There's about 2,000 articles in it, and it's got a big span of history. The idea is that there's a page in that encyclopedia for every person, place, thing, and event of significance to the Q community in Halifax ever. So it starts out, the oldest entry is from 1752, which is a record of soldiers being tried for buggery for having sex on. Where's the cruising? Do you know the cruising space in Halifax? Okay, too old for that. The cruising space, for as long as anyone can remember, has been Citadel Hill. And these soldiers in 1752 were tried for buggery on Citadel Hill. So here we have a cruising space, which arguably or inarguably has been in use for 300 years. That's pretty cool. We have a record of Oscar Wilde visiting here in 1892. Yeah, he came here and he delivered a couple of lectures. Halifax wasn't very special. He traveled back and forth across North America several times, delivering the same lectures. One night, and they were all the same. One night was a lecture on architecture, and one night was a lecture on aesthetics, I think. And they were held at the thing that was before the Capitol Theater at the corner of Spring Garden and Barrington.
So you were talking about, and you said Halifax, but I'm sure that the rest of the province comes into play.
Yeah, you have to draw some lines somewhere. I mostly focus on Halifax. If someone came to me and said, "Hey, we've got this really interesting story about Truro or New Glasgow or Sydney," I would certainly not say no, for a couple of reasons. A, there's it's online. There's lots of room, and B, there's no other place for it. You know, if someone else was creating a history of the Q community in Yarmouth, I would certainly say, here's all my resources. You're taking it over because I know you can do a better job. So absolutely, if that ever happens, I'm more than happy to do that. Oh, and also one of the people who died on the Titanic might have been gay, and so there's this kind of debate back and forth about whether he was or not. His name's George Wright. Um, and so, enough about me, enough about the encyclopedia. We're going to burn into some history stuff here. Uh, we don't know a great, and so this is going to be organized by decade, more or less, and I'm going to cut off at about in the 2000s. Uh, we don't have a lot of information about what happened in before 1970. Annika, do we have any questions up here before we burn into anything?
Not yet, but I
Okay,
have a feeling there's going to be some once you get into
okay,
the 70s.
okay. Come on, bring it on, people. And the other thing you'll notice is that it's possible that I don't have some facts right here. And I expect to hear from people who want to make the encyclopedia better. That's what it's all about, is continuous improvement of this thing. It is not a finished document. So before the 1960s and stuff, we can guess that there were um, parties in people's houses. We can guess that there were drag shows in people's houses. Um, we know that there was cruising going on, but we don't have any. We don't have any facts about that. We don't have any documents. Sadly, we don't have any letters. What would be great would be to find a cache of letters from someone talking about what a gay life was or lesbian life was in Halifax in 1965. That would be fantastic. You know, writing back to their friend in London or whatever. That would be a dream. Saying, I went to this party. We had this. Here's what happened. We don't have anything like that. Maybe it'll show up. Maybe at some point someone will open a box of old letters and we'll have it somewhere. So, um, as we know, in 1969, Stonewall happened in New York. That wasn't the first kind of big LGBT thing that happened in North America or the world. It's just the one that we hear about most.
Wasn't the first one 1929 or something?
All kinds of stuff went on. For instance, Berlin was an amazing place in the 1920s for queer folk.
Still is.
And still is, that's right, and is again. There was a brief time there when it was not such a nice place for queer folk. And yeah, so, but we hear about Stonewall. That was in 1969, but also a whole bunch of stuff went on in the late 60s that made these things possible. Everybody, young people said, it's time to change the world. So Stonewall happened, and then I'm trying to make a shape on the screen here. I can't. I'll do shadow puppets. Stonewall happened, and then 3 years later, in 1972, Halifax had a functional LGBT organization with meetings and a newsletter and a meeting space and people deciding to do things and minutes and resolutions and a budget. And we don't know how that happened. We don't know, but we can guess, because this is how everything happens. We can guess that a bunch of people were sitting around in a kitchen, around a kitchen table, and saying, something has to get done. Something has to happen. We need to do something. But that's just we can guess that because that's how stuff happens. We know who that happened with, because these are people who signed the initial document of incorporation of GAE, but we don't have that story yet. The
Do
story
you
of
have that in the encyclopedia?
which is that, the incorporation
Yes.
of GAE. Yeah, it's there.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and so we have the actual date on it. We have a date on which, well, it, thank you for that segue, Lance. Here's a letter from Anne Fulton the letter's dated on November 1972 and says, as of June 4th, 1972, the Halifax gay community established an organization known as the Gay Alliance for Equality with an elected executive committee of 5. We plan to register a nonprofit organization. And this is the declaration that, we now have a formal community. And so this is 50 years ago. It would be really great to celebrate June 4th, 1972 this year, 51 half century. This is Ann Fulton here. And this is the first of the plugs for Lance, you and the audience, to do history. Our story with Ann is that she lived by herself. She was one of the people who organized the beginning of our community. She was, as far as anyone could tell, in perfect health. And she was a photographer and an archivist herself. And so she had all kinds of stuff in her house, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of photographs, of negatives certainly, and thousands of photographs. And one day, 7 years ago, she called her neighbor and said, you know what, I'm not feeling all that great. And by the time the neighbor got to her house, 15 minutes later, she was dead. And she didn't have a will, and she didn't have there were no instructions left about what to do. And we, the community, had a sense that her family might be homophobic, and we were terrified. We were concerned that the family was going to come in because they have a right to. It's theirs. It belongs to them. The house belongs to them now, and just take everything off to the dumpster. And so we immediately. This is largely a incentive by Robin Metcalf, one of the great historians, the great historian of our community. Quickly wrote a letter to the family saying what important materials Anne had, and it was important that these not be discarded. And we also were prepared to show up at the house and intervene in possibly an unfriendly way, if necessary. Or if they threw stuff into a dumpster, for us to retrieve it from the dumpster. We didn't know what was going to happen. Instead, we got a letter back right away saying, we're going to clear out the house on the weekend. It's available to you on Thursday and Friday. Take everything that is relevant to the community. Help yourself. And so we rallied a bunch of people. We went in. So this is one of those cases, this judo move where you go to push someone and instead they grab your hand and pull.
That's a really good story.
The family grabbed our hand and pulled, and we were off balance, but we did it. Yeah.
Right. It's an extraordinary story. Can we just go quickly back to Stonewall, just to touch base. Stonewall is credited to drag queens. They were the force that police were arresting and on Christopher Street, and it went on. And drag queens today continue to play a huge part in our community, and including here.
Absolutely. We have very vibrant.
We have a very vibrant, and I just wanted to touch base on that in a sense, and that the Stonewall riot actually went for a week, did it not?
Several days.
It went for several days. Police and drag queens. It was a gathering of people, so it was an amazing thing. So I just wanted to touch base why some people didn't know about the Stonewall.
There's many tellings of the Stonewall story. Some of them assert that it was racialized drag queens, and that were part of it. So there's many tellings of the story, and I encourage you to everyone to look up the story and look at the different tellings of it. It's quite interesting. For instance, there's a famous part of art of the way the story is standardly told that says someone picked up a brick and threw it, and lots of people have said there were no bricks there. No one could have thrown a brick at a police car. There were no bricks. Neither of those. I mean, it seems more likely that there were bricks, but anyway, there's lots of tellings of the story. It's a super fascinating story. And it's also, it's one that it's a story that you can tell in an amount of time. I would love to be able to tell that story about Halifax. I would love to say, in the summer of 1971, a bunch of people were at a party and they said, we need an organization. And a year later we had it. That would be fantastic. Can't tell that story yet, but maybe it's going to be in the future. So very shortly after that, the Unitarian Universalist Church offered, or we asked, we don't know, we must have asked if we could have meeting space at the UU Church on Oxford Street, and they said yes. We know this because we can pull their minutes out. They're not board. What's the thing that's like a board for the Unitarians or for a church? Anyway, the board said we have this request for the LGBT community to use our space for meetings, and they said yes. And that UU Church has been in use by our community for quite a while, and I'll mention it a couple more times as we go through it.
They are I do know here in Halifax, a great ally
Right.
of our.
And the thing that stood out in 1972 is that there were a huge number of churches who would not even say the word homosexual, much less offer to host a group. And the Unitarians said, of course you can, why not? And probably the Quakers would have as well. And so almost immediately also, we got a interdenominational Christian group called Sparrow formed. So you can see that from the very beginning of an organized community in Halifax, we have had an organized spiritual community as well. Sparrow was around for many, many years. Let me have I don't have the dates on it. Lance, you or someone in the audience, please take it under your wing and let's do this piece of research, and let's get the dates, and let's find out how Sparrow gelled up and when they gelled up and when they had meetings. Many of the people involved are still alive, but I don't want to be too macabre about it. Think about it. They were young people in 1972. Do the math. And we want to be able to get those stories from them while they're still able to tell the stories. The other thing that gelled up right away is the gay line. And so the organization, JE, started paying for 2 phone lines. I worked this for many years. I was a volunteer for the gay line for many years. It was a fantastic way to learn about your city and learn about concerns. So as you can see here, we staffed it Thursday to Friday, 7:30 to 10. So 2.5 hours, 3 nights a week. And the phone would just ring and someone would ask you a question. And the questions were usually, where's the cruising area? Where's the bars? Where's the bath? Right, because we had a saying, we're the 3 Bs, bars, baths, and bushes. And so we just had a category for calls. We had the 3B was one of the categories for calls. But also every now and then you'd have a call from someone in a troubled emotional state, and you would have to, like, from their tone of voice, this was hard work. This is freaking hard work. From their tone of voice, you would have to figure out what their emotional state was and be in a position to help them. We had 2 phone lines because in theory someone could have called and been suicidal, and we could have dialed the other number and 911 could have dialed 911, got help. That never happened, but we had 2 phone lines. We had a phone line just for that, and then we got a lot of crank calls as well. For a while, our phone number wasn't this. The phone number changed a couple of times. For a while, it was 6969, and people had a lot of fun with that. Yeah, so and the gay line was very long-lived. The gay line was in existence until 1996. From about 1972 to 1976, for any organization, that's a long-lived thing. But of course, internet comes along, and the need for people to get connected via phone numbers goes down. So also in the 70s, there were a bunch of bars. And I'm not going to go through the big list of bars. You can look those up on the encyclopedia if you want. Several of them were in the on Barrington Street in the building called the Green Lantern Building, which has been in the news last little while. And for a while, believe it or not, the Green Lantern Building was an all LGBT space, except for the this is not the Green Lantern Building. This is another building. So except for there were occasionally bars like once a week or a couple times a month on the top floor. There was a LGBT bookstore on the second from the top floor, and then there were offices that people were using for apartments. That the drag community and the rest of the community were using for apartments in the building. So in ways, it was kind of a huge community center in like 1973, 74, 75.
I know this is in Halifax.
This is on Barrington Street. This has a bunch of different names depending on who you're talking to.
The bottom half just reminds me of 519 in Toronto.
Oh yes, right.
The community center for our community in Toronto.
The bar that we had was up here on the top floor. The DJ booth was here in the turret. This is why the bar was called the turret, because of this feature. And we had the rest of the space for dance space and the bar itself. DJ was enclosed in this part. And so I remember as a teen, I would walk down Barrington Street and I would see the lights flashing in the windows of this turret, and I'd be like, and I knew it was a gay bar, and I knew I was gay, but I was too young to go, and I would be like thinking to myself, wow, I bet they're having a lot of fun in there. And walk back and forth, and occasionally look at, see if I could see people going in and out. So very often people refer to this building now as the Khyber building. We elder Q folk more or less will refer to it as the turret. Do you have anything else to say about that?
I think if we're just looking at time here, we'll just keep motoring.
Yeah, let's keep motoring. The other important thing about this bar is that it was not owned by, it was not a business, it was owned by the community. We owned it. So what that meant was that all the profits that came out of it went into community projects. So it meant that we had money to do stuff, to organize conferences and pay for the gay line and send people out to conferences and stuff. There were only a couple bars in Halifax. There were only a couple bars in Canada that were owned by the community. The other one was maybe in Winnipeg or Regina, maybe. 1980s. Let's. Your opinion. Do you think that 12-step programs are a religious group or a spiritual?
Spiritual.
Yeah, that would be the usual. That would be the usual. That's the name they would use for themselves. In 1980s, very early on, we got a 12-step LGBT Alcoholics Anonymous group called Live and Let Live. That's their symbol. And a few years later, they began organizing annual conferences called the Courage Roundup, which were held originally hosted at St. Peter's in Dartmouth, probably because of this amazing out of the closet, very out Roman Catholic priest named Father Louis Casey, much beloved by everyone. I think that was his home church. And then we moved to the Universalist Unitarian Church, and they've been held there ever since. In 1988, so that's 34-ish years of this conference. Also 1980s, we had an Affirm United. We don't know, this is another piece of research that needs to get done. We don't know when that gelled up. We don't know exactly who was involved. That's a piece of research. And then, as long as we're talking about the United Church, we've got a bunch of churches becoming affirming much later. Bedford United, St. John's United. St. John's United, I was friends with Al Stewart, who was one of the elders at the time, started talking about becoming affirming probably at least 10 years before it actually happened. And in the meantime, while they were still talking, Bedford United Church kind of scooped them, but all good, all's well that ends well. And so now we've got a little stack of affirming churches in Nova Scotia, in Atlantic Canada, yeah. Including Bridgewater. I attended the one in Bridgewater, which was just a couple of years ago, quite an event. And Affirm United, we know, had a rainbow weekend at Tatamagouche Center in 2004. There was a Seventh-day Adventist group here called Kinship for a while. I'm certain they're not still meeting. We never had a Mormon group, even though they do exist. Also 1980s, organization called CARAS. And if you look at the notes, like as an archivist, I get to flip through the actual paper and see the actual things. The first minutes of CARAS are typed, Catholics assembled to respond to AIDS. And then the next set of minutes, it's typed, Catholics assembled to respond to AIDS, and the Catholics is crossed out and church members is written in. So we know exactly when they changed their name and decided they're going to spread their wings a little bit. This, again, is a story that needs more research and more telling. So there's the remarkable thing about this is that the time between those first set of minutes and the time that they bought this house and made it into a AIDS hospice, because it was the 1980s and lots of people were dying of AIDS, is measured in months. And I normally think of church stuff happening at the speed of cold molasses going uphill, and how they went from organizing to buying a house in that many months. There's a story there. I know there's a story there. There's some fascinating thing of someone doing heroics, and that should be they should be recognized. That should be documented. It's a super exciting story.
Now, what happened to Morton?
I don't know. I know where it was. I know when we bought it because I have the real estate agent wrote a note and said, here's a picture of Morton House. And we have complete documentation of everything that happened at Morton House. Like, I know on what day the carpenter came in and changed a hinge because I have the receipt for the hinge. They were amazingly well organized. Short dalliance here. 1980s, we had in Nova Scotia, we had a scandal, I guess you would call it. Well, the scandal was that it was a scandal, and this was the problem. This is the problem that the Q community had with it. Is that in 1980s, mid 1980s, 1985, yeah, the media or someone got this story that the naval base in Shelburne was populated by lesbians. It was denoted a lesbian ring. It got into the press. Of course, the politicians at that point said, well, we have to rout out this lesbian ring. And we, the Q community at the time said, A, no, you don't have to make a big deal out of this because there happened to be some lesbians working at this base. B, calling it a ring is really offensive. And C, making it a media circus is also really offensive. And so we had these are notes from the organization. Here we have a handwritten, here's the newsletter. Protest the Shelburne dismissal. So these are women for protesting as being dismissed. And these are handwritten notes in the newsletter just before it went to press saying, here's our organizing meeting. This is us getting organized for that. I was a kid at the time. Well, not a kid, but I was young. I had no idea what a lesbian ring was, and so that was my imagination for what it was. I thought it was some kind of a dessert. Wrong. Moving right along, there's a Roman Catholic group called Dignity that we don't have any documentation on. We don't know when they were. We don't know the who. We have some idea about the who's. We don't know the whens. We don't know why they gelled up. We don't know when they stopped meeting. That would be a thing. Again, these are all in the 80s. In the 1980s, we had this huge sort of Buddhist community called the Shambhalans moved to Halifax, a lot from the US, and there was a big community, a Q community that came with them. And so they've had meetings on and off over the years. This is a very well-known picture of a Pride March, not a Pride Parade. July 1st, 1988, a protest. And it was right around that time that there was a bunch of people who wore paper bags on their head. Not say the people who were there because they were in the closet, but because they were trying to make a point that if legislation was not changed in Nova Scotia, they would have to wear paper bags at work. So anyway, this paper bag thing is very well known. People remember it well. Flipping on to the 1990s, a lot of people were dying in the 1990s. These two were the first people that a lot of people knew in Halifax who died in the late 80s and the 90s. The AIDS epidemic really took hold, and we were having people, well-known people in the community, die every week. It was a pretty awful time. And these are a couple AIDS quilt panels. One for Graham Ellis, who was kind of the first person that everybody in the community knew who died, and that was a big impact. And this is Frank Morton's panel, the person for whom that house is named.
I can remember living in Toronto and the gay newspaper, Extra. I can remember literally every week pages and pages of photographs of people who died
And obituaries.
that week, and it just became so depressing to get that newspaper at the time. It was so shameful. However, the pages started to get less and less and less, and great things were happening. June Caldwell started the hospice house, which is still going today. June Caldwell is a famous, yeah. Anyways, I just want to throw that in there about that was a tough time for the community.
Of course, the hospital, the Victoria General Hospital here in Halifax had an AIDS wing at the time. We don't anymore for a bunch of reasons. And for a while, I think the AIDS wing was 8A, and so for a while, you could just go. You didn't have to have a reason to go to 8A. You just went to 8A and you walked around and visited with your friends who were dying. That was a thing to do. You know, on Tuesday evenings, you would go up to 8A and we'd walk around and visit with people who, you know, and at the time, you know, you went from not knowing you were sick to being dead in a very short march of months. It was a pretty awful time for that. However, some really wonderful things went on at the same time. This organization, this church called Safe Harbor Church, and then very shortly later became Safe Harbor Metropolitan Community Church, following a very similar. Would you guys United Church experts agree that it's MCC is very much along the lines of United Church, following the tradition of United Church? Yeah. And so they had quite a few spaces. This picture is of their space in Bloomfield Center, but they moved around a lot. They were, I think, for a while in the Unitarian Universalist Church. At the end, they were meeting in Veith House in the North End. For a while, they met in the AIDS Coalition offices. They had quite a charismatic leader named Reverend Darlene Young. And so we now have or had up until briefly, I'm not sure if it's going to come back, the Reverend Darlene Young Memorial Dinner, which St. John's United was running for a while. I'm not quite sure what the status of that is.
Well, that was done through the MEM.
That's right. And it created, they created Manna for Health in 1984. And that dinner was a fundraiser for
and maintained right up until just before
COVID.
Before COVID.
Yeah. And I'm just going to run through a bunch of other stuff. And we had, for many years, we had LGBT friendly wedding chapel. Um, we had a thing called the Spiritual Science Fellowship, which is the second oddest spiritual experience that you will go to ever in Halifax. I encourage you to go to it. It's very cool. They meet in the Unitarian Universalist. Uh, the most surprising one is this group called the Brahma Kumaris. And an amazing experience. Brahma Kumaris is guided meditation, and you literally leave your mind, leave the room, leave the province, leave the continent, leave the planet, and then she brings you back. That's what a service is. It's quite an experience. And all along, quietly, the Quakers. The Quakers didn't make a big deal of it, but they've been open and accepting all this time. And 2000s, we're just going to very quickly go through there. 2000s, so we had integrity for the Anglicans, and we can see there's a big turnout here in, I'm not sure which parade this is, a fairly recent one, a few years ago. Integrity started in 2004. I suspect, I'm sure that this photo is from much later. And you can see lots of these people have collars on. So we've got ministers coming from all over the place, which is absolutely wonderful. And here's another big list of gay-friendly churches. Koinonia Church from 2002. An odd thing called the Messiah Project that I know nothing about. Center of Hope. 2007, the Shar Shalom, conservative synagogue, declared themselves LGBT friendly, welcoming, affirming, whichever word they use, because they had a rabbi there named Ari Eisenberg who said, "This is the way forward. We have to be looking forward at this point." And they've actually they invited LGBT weddings in at the synagogue long before they actually did it. Most organizations, most churches, there's a couple members who say we want to get married, and the church figures out how to do it. The synagogue did it the other way around. 2010, this amazing project called Spirit Place, which was St. John's United project that was slightly before your time, Lance. But we were going to use that old space at Willow and Windsor and provide housing for everyone, and specifically, a safe space for our community. Sadly, that didn't really work out very well. And believe it or not, we had a queer mosque in Halifax for a while, and not meaning a building, but meaning a bunch of people who regularly meet. A bunch of Muslims who regularly meet and worship together. I attended one of the meetings. It was amazing. Okay, and so we're at the end here, and I'm just putting another plug for doing history work now while you're still able. What you don't want to happen is a unexpected and forced downsizing, and stuff has to go into the dumpster. That's the awful thing. You don't want boxes of unlabeled photographs left behind. Those are just boxes full of sadness. Photos have to have captions because if as soon as you hand them to someone else, they won't be able to guess who's in the photos. The photos have literally zero value to archivists. So that's a good project. What kind of things go in the archives? I hear you ask. Stories. If you want to write down a story, we'll take it. If you want to tell a story in an interview, we'll do that. Stories of who did what, stories of parties, and good things and bad things, all of those. We have room for all of those in the archives. We save those usually as audio tapes that are then indexed. Someone listens to them and says, here's the topics the person talks about. So if you're interested in a story about the time our community had a squabble about whether men were allowed to wear shirts on the dance floor at Rumors. You can look that up and you can say, okay, that's at 1 hour and 26 minutes on this tape, and you hit the button and it starts playing. And you hear the story about that from the person who was there. That's pretty cool. Physical objects go into the archives as well. Documents, photos, video and audio and memorabilia, and this thing particularly precious called, we call it ephemera. It's stuff that's not meant to be saved. So tickets to things, posters of things, announcements of things. That's very cool. The oral histories, where we sit down and we do an interview with you. This is Helen Creighton. This picture here, my hero. This must have been in the 1950s because she's got audio tape there, and we know that magnetic tape didn't exist before World War II. And here she is out in the boonies somewhere with this monster tape recorder that she lugged around. She's got her microphone set up here, and she's getting this guy to tell stories or sing. We don't know what, because she collected a lot of songs. And she tried, like, there's other pictures of her with this tape recorder in a wheelbarrow, and she's walking down a path with the tape recorder in a wheelbarrow. What a hero! What an amazing person. And you know, we've got all this history recorded because of her. If you want to learn more about history, where do you go? Well, there's the encyclopedia. To get to the encyclopedia, type gay in Halifax and any topic, and you'll get a hit on some page, probably in there. Rebecca Rose has written this fantastic book called Before the Parade, which gives in much greater and much more accurate detail all the stuff that we've run over, less churchy stuff than we've done tonight. And we also have an LGBT Archives, which is housed at Dell. And so if you're doing research, you can actually ask them. You can say, do you have anything on this topic? And they can say yes or no and get it for you.
Yes, I was reading about the archives there. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
I must get there. I have to thank you. It was just super.
How can you contribute? Stories, materials, photos, volunteer. Contact me if you want to, when you want to volunteer. We always work, and you can always contribute dollars and contact me to find out how to do that. That's it. That's it for me.
Thank you, Dan. It was a truly informative evening.
Can we go overtime and answer questions if there are any?
Yes, of course.
I have one.
Okay.
And there's a comment from Margot, and she's giving you a tidbit of information. She thinks that the priest, Mike McDonald, who also had AIDS, was helpful in establishing Morton House.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Okay. And my question is, what words of hope do you have for young people who don't have an organization in their school or church that they feel they can turn to? Do you have any words of hope about them organizing, or where they could potentially call, or to get information or talk to someone about organizing more? Just what kind of words of wisdom do you have?
Well, a couple things. A lot of schools, luckily these days, do have things called GSAs, which used to stand for Gay and Straight Alliance, but it doesn't anymore, and I can't remember what it now stands for.
Gender and sexuality.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's right. That's where we are right now. But these organizations called GSAs exist in many, I can't say all high schools, but many of them.
Sadly, not all, and sadly, only a
Yeah.
few middle schools.
And we also have several organizations here in Halifax, and one in and others distributed around Nova Scotia. There's a youth project in Halifax. There's something a lot like the youth project over in Dartmouth, whose name I can't remember, but it's a specific youth organization that has a big focus on queer youth. They were involved heavily with Pride last year, and there are other organizations around the province in Bridgewater and Wolfville, and probably a few other places as well. I don't have those at the tip of my hands, but tip of my fingers. But uh, there are organizations which will welcome them, and they can get involved. And if they're, remote, a lot of these organizations are now holding meetings online.
Yes, like the flag.
Exactly.
There's all sorts of things. Again, Dan, thank you very much. I just want to do a little plugging for the rest of our week here.
Okay.
And I do apologize for the beginning of I was a little nervous, and so now I'm ready to really tell you some things that I wanted to tell you at the very beginning. Pi Day started in 2019 by the Affirming Connections Affirmed Church, which has quickly become the United Church favorite holiday. Pi stands for Public, Intentional, Explicit. At St. John's, we hosted our first Pi Day on March 14th, 2020. In 2021, we launched our GSA on Pi Day, and in 2022, we decided that Pi Day is too good to only have once a year, and so we decided to make it a 4-day event. I think it was 2 years ago, a couple of us volunteered to have pies thrown in our face, and we raised a good amount of money. And I'm just looking at the hard work of our principal minister, Hubert, is here, and we both. I was the other pie taker. Um, it was wonderful to have Dan here tonight, and Dan has been a great help in putting us with the connection with a lot of people for our upcoming events. I have to remind you that tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, your Zoom number will stay the same, and it's movie night tomorrow night, and our wonderful spiritual minister, Annika,
Spiritual
will
growth
be
and outreach. It's
with
okay.
that.
Spiritual growth and outreach. It's a long title.
I'm Lance, old and gray. We have movie night, and you can have a vote on it. The movies are Fairhaven, Transamerica, Uncle Frank. So you have some good choices there.
Uncle Frank.
Uncle Frank is a good one. Yeah. And Saturday night, we have just a really exciting night. We have music and poetry night, a collage of rainbow songs, poetry, and art. We'll be featuring Paul Healy from our own congregation, Pat Brennan Albert, Nolan Natashi, and Ken MacKay. Butter guests. Paul Healy is St. John's regular. Paul's gift of singing travels with him in his daily life and his work. He's a great storyteller and poetry, and Paul has written an original piece for this event, and I have been privy to hear it, and it is phenomenal. And please join us on Saturday night. Nolan is a queer trans writer, performer, and filmmaker. Nolan lives in North End and has a way with words that is getting noticed and nominated. Nolan is a perfect fit for a Rainbow Arts collage. Ken MacKay is a queer Indigenous artist whose spiritual journey is summarized in Living in the Flow. It's episode 6, and Ken's particular passion for mental health and the importance of water will inspire us to live the flow too. And an incredible story. He's such a wonderful young man, incredible story. You'll really enjoy him. And we have much more music and a lot of fun. Sunday, we ask you to join us for worship service here at St. John's United at the Conservatory for Music at 10:30. It will be in celebration of our affirming. We have great programs, and we have a great reflection given by a couple of members of our church who are actually leaders and participatory people in making our church affirmed and welcoming. And we at St. John's just want to remind everybody that we have been affirmed for 15 years. That is a wonderful thing. And also, you will be able to start bidding via voting for your pie. It's a silent auction. We are raising money. We need, I said at church last Sunday and nobody responded, but anyways, we need money. Our GSA has been going for a couple of years. We have done some pretty sincere projects. We've got some big ones coming up, and we would like to raise enough money. So we're hoping with our pies and anybody who would just like to support our GSA, please just get in touch with St. John's and we'll tell you how to send money. So that's my pitch on Monday, or on money. Monday, March 14th, I alluded before, we will be announcing the winners of the highest bids for the pies, and the pies will be delivered on Tuesday. Our guest speaker is the Right Reverend Gary Patterson, and the pie auction is on Monday. This will be a wonderful event. It's live. The Right Reverend Gary Patterson will be doing it from Vancouver. Our principal pastor, Hubert, will be doing the interview, and we're encouraging all people, if they have any questions, there will be a Q&A, and we're really looking forward to it. And we like to think that we had a great start with Dan, and we're really excited for the rest of our Pi Day celebration. Please join us tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, Saturday night at 7 o'clock, Sunday at 10:30 at church, and Monday night at 7 o'clock again. Thank you all for joining us. We thank you. We give you our best, and we'll see you soon. See you tomorrow night at the movies.